President Donald Trump just said the U.S. has not necessarily been focused on this country and trade. Also, he says the United States may not reach a negotiated trade deal with Canada. Trump said today, as he was leaving for Scotland, suggested his administration could set a tariff rate unilaterally, saying, quote, "We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where there's just a tariff, not really a negotiation." Okay, with that, I want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. She was listening in to those remarks from the U.S. president as he was departing Washington. Let's dissect a little bit about the tone and the content of what he was saying there.
Yeah, and the first thing everyone needs to do is exhale, because what the president just said there actually lines up very consistently with what we heard from Canada's negotiators on this, Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, and the lead minister on the file, Dominic LeBlanc, who has been down in Washington for a couple of days this week, speaking to his counterpart, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, as well as a number of Republican senators. Remember yesterday, they started tilling soil. Actually, Mark Carney also has been starting to prepare Canadians for the idea that Canada may not have a deal by August 1st. And we heard the ambassador yesterday saying part of the reason why they're putting in supports for affected industries is because they need to buy themselves more negotiating room. We heard from both Hillman and LeBlanc yesterday that they are not interested in doing a bad deal, that they are only going to do a good deal when it's right for Canadian workers. Carney also had said that earlier this week. Their message fairly consistent, showing a lot of patience, notwithstanding the fact that LeBlanc was characterizing his conversations with Lutnick this week as productive and cordial, not hostile, but nevertheless sort of suggesting that there doesn't appear to be a deal imminent in terms of these conversations. So when you see Donald Trump field this question the way he did and say that actually they're not having a lot of luck forcing Canada into a deal on their terms, that Canada could be one where they just put the tariff in, the tariff that was warned about in a letter, that there isn't a negotiation of some kind of deal to escape that tariff. What Trump is saying is actually consistent with what Canadians have heard from their own government. Now, why would Canada not be in a panic to get a deal the way we have seen some other countries? I think most recently and most interestingly was Japan's deal. We'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. Why would Canada not be in a panic? Well, the big thing Canada has going for it is that the vast majority of the goods that are able to enter the U.S. Under the terms of the CUSMA, the renegotiated North American Trade Agreement, are exempt. Canada is still hit with steel, aluminum tariffs. Softwood lumber still is definitely in need of some kind of a solution. But the deals that they're negotiating now with Japan, for example, don't get you out from under the steel tariffs. They're in a whole different category. The kind of tariff that sort of these reciprocal tariffs that are in play right now, Canada's trade under CUSMA, if you do the paperwork, if it's eligible for that, it's not affected. So it's a smaller percentage of Canada's trade. Canada is in a very privileged position as a partner with the revised treaty that Trump negotiated in his first administration. So that is why Canada can perhaps afford to be a little bit more patient than some of these other countries that did not have trade deals with the U.S. previously to sort of give them a bilateral preferential arrangement. But the other thing you have to consider, and I have no doubt that Canadian negotiators are watching this. The other countries that have kind of raced there and got deals fast are getting into issues where what they think they've negotiated with the White House might not really be what the White House is describing as having negotiated with them. We saw that this week with the Japan deal, for example. The White House out there saying, oh, there's going to be a $500 billion fund. We can spend it however we want. The Japanese saying, well, no, we agreed to some loan guarantees for some strategic investments, portraying these things as totally differently. And of course, it's not written down. Nobody has text. Nobody has signed anything. So each is seeing it the way they want to. Trump is on his way to Scotland to visit some of his golf course properties over there. He didn't have on his formal itinerary for the weekend anything in particular as far as public events, but he said to reporters here that he's going to be meeting with Keir Starmer while he's there. Of course, the UK very quick to reach a framework, a trade deal, but as we've learned in the weeks since, That also didn't have meat on the bones. It also didn't have specifics reached. Yes, there was sort of this lower 10% tariff and a quota on cars and a number of kind of specifics mentioned in social media or orally, but they haven't signed any paper on that either. One of the reasons why he needs to sit down with Starmer while he's in Scotland, while he's visiting the UK this weekend, is that they're still hammering that out, notwithstanding the fact that sort of they're supposed to already have their deal. You heard Trump there saying, well, for a lot of countries, their letter is going to be their deal. He also very interestingly said the odds of reaching a deal with the EU, which frankly, if you're looking at people with whom there is a significant kind of what Trump refers to as a trade deficit, a difference in terms of, imports versus exports going in and out, a gap, that Trump is bothered by, the EU would be top of that list. He says now he thinks it's about a 50-50 odds that the EU is going to come to an agreement over the next week or so. It's been very interesting to see sort of the messages out there about how the Japan deal went down in European circles and how everyone's trying to sort of position themselves and pivot to not be at a disadvantage where they're getting a lot more higher tariffs than other countries. But this new baseline of 15% seems to be the deal. Again, though, just to remind people, what Canada would be looking at as of August 1st would be a 35% tariff, but not on all the trade, just on that slice of trade that can't get in under CUSMA paperwork, and that is separate from the sectoral tariffs, which is really, honestly, what Canada has been trying to negotiate away with Howard Lutnick. That appears to kind of not be sorted yet. Frankly, until that's sorted, I wouldn't expect Canada to make a deal.
And we do want to take a closer look at the trade relationship between Canada and the United States, particularly given those recent remarks from the U.S. president. So with that, let's turn now to Christopher Sands for his insight on this. He is the director of the Hopkins Centre for Canadian Studies at the Johns Hopkins University, and he's also an expert on Canada-U.S. relations. Thank you for making time for us today.
Good morning, Arthi. Nice to be here.
Okay, so of course we know that we're working towards an August 1st deadline. Ahead of that, the commentary from the U.S. president doesn't sound very favorable when it comes to the Canada and the United States reaching some sort of trade agreement. What did you make of his remarks?
Well, it's interesting. I think the president is trying to up a little pressure on Canada. We saw this in the case of Japan as well. The phrase, it's always darkest before the dawn. The pressure sort of builds up. It looks like no deal is possible, and then a deal can come through. So I think he's still posturing a little bit, trying to create an environment where Canada might be willing to give up a little bit more. It's something we've seen from him. I'm not sure, though, that it guarantees we won't have an agreement, although Ambassador Hoekstra here in Seattle earlier in the week suggested could be August 1st, could be August 2nd, 3rd, 4th. It could stretch a little bit. So I'm not sure how to gauge the date, but I know the negotiations must be close because of the escalation in rhetoric from the president.
And it's interesting that that is sort of a marker of the status of the talks and the negotiations as well. And it's interesting when we're talking about the timing of these remarks from the U.S. president, because we do know that Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who has been the head of this file, is in Washington, or he was yesterday. And when he characterized his conversations with U.S. lawmakers, with the Commerce Secretary, he said that he was feeling encouraged, and he described them as productive as well, the discussions that he's having with the U.S. counterparts. So how does that differ then when we're seeing these remarks from the U.S. president saying we haven't had a lot of luck with Canada?
Well, the president is the final decider. I know you've seen this from Secretary of Treasury Bessent, Secretary of Commerce Lutnick, and also from Jameson Greer, our U.S. Trade Representative. They all seem to work towards a deal, but it's clear that Donald Trump will make the final call. So I think we are probably close, but the signal from Trump is, don't forget me. I'm going to be the one who makes the judgment on whether this is a deal the U.S. will sign. And that's his M.O.
You know, he suggested also that the administration could just set a unilateral sort of tariff rate rather than even negotiate agreement. I know that you've indicated that perhaps that is a strategy here. Perhaps that means that there's a little bit more of a pressure tactic as well. But is it a possibility that August 1st could come and go and the 35% tariff rate that he had threatened for that date could just be implemented?
It is absolutely possible. One thing that's been disappointing to me is that while Congress had several opportunities to go back and sunset some of the tariff authorities they had previously given, not to Trump particularly, we were talking about the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, which is 1977. Some of these things have been out there for a long time, and so far, when countries have tried to challenge that, or even U.S. industries have tried to challenge the president's authority to levy the tariffs, the courts have supported the president on those tariffs. So absolutely, the threat has teeth. At the same time, we've got steel and aluminum tariffs. We have the tariffs on the auto sector. And so going to 35% is adding on top of all of that. So it's definitely worse. But you not only need to avoid the 35%, you need to get rid of some of those tariffs that right now are stalling investment and causing heartburn in Oshawa, in St. Catharines, and Windsor, all the places where Canadian auto industry jobs are really on the line.
You know, it's interesting because I'm continuing to look at the remarks that we heard from those who are handling our trade negotiations and what we're hearing from the U.S. president. And our ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, who was speaking yesterday as well, she emphasized something that we've also heard from the prime minister and we heard from premiers earlier this week, saying, I think it's important for us to recognize that there's a time when the deal is the right deal. Really emphasizing here that, it's not a deal at any cost. It must be the right deal for Canadians. Meanwhile, Trump saying just moments ago that he hasn't really been focusing on Canada. So do you think then we might see the moving up of a renegotiation of the current trade agreement, the CUSMA agreement that we are operating under? Is that something that might just be the byproduct of these what appear to be failing discussions?
I think the two are connected, but separate. So the USMCA CUSMA review, which has to take place in 2026, will be triggered by the meeting of the Free Trade Commission, which is the trade ministers of the three countries. They're supposed to meet every year. They have done, and they're looking at September, October, from what I'm hearing, for having that meeting, and that'll start the review process. Prime Minister Carney's been clear his security and economic agreement is a chapeau on top of that secondary agreement, the USMCA CUSMA. And so it's interesting. I think the reason Carney has proposed a security and economic agreement is to be able to talk about Canada spending its 2% on defense and getting more involved in border security, all sorts of things that Canada has been doing, which give it a leg up on Mexico because Canada and the U.S. are security allies. So I think he's hoping to set the stage for that second agreement. But that's the other reason that I agree with Ambassador Hillman. If you accept a bad deal here, you're going to go right into the USMCA talks or CUSMA talks, and then you could be asked to make more concessions. So you might as well hold your ground on the security and economic agreement and try to preserve your best arguments for when the USMCA review, CUSMA review, starts in a few months. Because I think those talks so far have proven to be really important for Canada. The president issues tariffs and exempts those things that are USMCA or CUSMA compliant and that they meet the rule of origin requirements. So right now, USMCA is the best safe harbor for Canada-US trade, and I'm hoping that the review will strengthen it. Certainly entering the review will calm down some of the random tariffs, and I hope give business a little bit more predictability.
Well, I think I'm going to have to leave this conversation here, but we know that it is developing fast and furious, so perhaps we'll have another conversation soon. Thanks for your time today, Christopher.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Christopher Sands is the director of the Hopkins Centre for Canadian Studies at Johns Hopkins University and an expert on Canada-US relations.